the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to nursing and healthcare. My name is Amy.
And my name is Sarah.
And we are your podcast hosts. This week we're going to be talking about PhD and MD. I don't want to say PhD versus MD because I don't think that is actually the correct term in terms of what we're trying to get at. But I think it's a good conversation to have and just to educate people on the various different terms and kind of where a little bit about the history of where doctor came from. And maybe even before we get into that, we can kind of talk about the mood over the weekend. So it's been actually kind of gloomy. I don't know. I'm sure most of our listeners have heard that there was a unfortunate accident on Sunday where Kobe Bryant and his daughter, and I guess it would be like 7 other people, died in a helicopter crash. So I know the mood for, I don't know if people are Raptors fans. So there was a Raptors versus the Spurs game. There was the Grammys going on. So the mood was really heavy this weekend. And, it's just, of course, an unfortunate event. And I think one of the things I said, just as we posted on the Gritty Nurse homepage, is you kind of never know what to expect from one day to the next. So, always tell someone that you love them and keep your family close and give them a extra hug. Yeah, it's kind of a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, and actually, when I heard that news, I sort of had this flashback to when I found out that Michael Jackson passed away. That was my first reaction. Well, first, I wanted to know if the news was real because when I looked it up, I only saw it on TMZ. And then I decided
TMZ.
I needed another news source just to verify it because I didn't want to believe it because it was just such bad news. And
Yeah.
then when I got confirmation, I was really sad. And I'm not even into sports, but I don't know anything about sports, but I do know Michael Jordan, I know Kobe Bryant, I know LeBron James. So that's about the extent of my basketball. And Jeremy Lin. Yeah, and I think for me, it's also been a little bit of, I don't want to say panic, but everybody's heard about the coronavirus. And
Oh no.
me and
Yeah.
you being in Canada, living relatively close to Toronto, you might have heard that there were 2 confirmed cases in Toronto. So just being in the healthcare field, there's been a lot of sort of a little bit of panic, I think, in terms of the public, and then being in healthcare, trying to relay messages and correct misinformation and that kind of thing. So that's sort of been the tone on top of the somber news that we got on the weekend.
Yeah, it's just kind of like a mixed bag, really. Like, I think this whole coronavirus, like, I don't think it's as big of a risk as like something like SARS was. I think in SARS, our healthcare system was quite unprepared for it in terms of like PPE and regulations, and I feel that we're much better equipped to deal with something like coronavirus. But I mean, two confirmed cases, I don't think it's something that we should be up in arms about. I think we should be vigilant, but I don't think it's something that we need to be terribly concerned about at this point.
Yeah, I agree. So Amy, do you want to sort of give an overview of our topic this week and sort of where it came from?
Yeah, so this is actually through just kind of watching social media and watching Twitter. I started I saw a post that came up on my Twitter feed where a group was kind of talking about, if you're a nurse and you have your PhD, you should probably put your RN first because it's really important to be noticed as a nurse first, and then as a PhD second. Really, because I think what this person was trying to get at is. Um, if you are a nurse and you put PhD first, or you kind of call yourself doctor, that people might misconstrue what you're trying to do, or if you're trying to kind of make yourself sound like a doctor, or just kind of, I guess, ideas like that. But I think what kind of happened was, it, to be honest, kind of turned into a little bit of a shit show where everyone was like, well, I worked hard for my PhD, and I think I deserve to have doctor at the beginning of my name. And then there were comments flying back and forth, and a flurry of people getting quite upset about with this person who kind of originally put out their tweet. about saying, like, about whether RN should be in front or whether PhD should be used. And it just was kind of a hot mess. And really, I think if you worked that hard, like, I mean, it's not an easy feat to get your PhD. I think it's anywhere between like to a 6 to 8 year journey, lots of residencies, lots of papers, lots of um, like a lot of research and work that is put into it. That I think that, at the end of the day, if you want to be called doctor, you damn well deserve to be called doctor.
Yeah, and I think my take on it is that I'm pretty sure that any RN that has their PhD is not looking to be seen as a medical doctor. And I don't think there's any intention on their part to sort of misrepresent themselves as a doctor. It's just in certain situations, and I even asked several of my friends that have PhDs, it depends on the situation they're in, whether you're referred to as doctor at the front of your name or if it's your name, comma, PhD. And like you said,
Right.
if you spent 6 to 8 years and six figures on getting your degree, I would think that you have the right to use your title in whatever way you want. And again, as long as you're not trying to pass yourself off as a medical doctor when you in fact are not. So that's the thing. And I think there's no one group that has ownership of the word doctor. So
Yes, I was
when
I was hoping you were going to get into
yeah,
that too.
because that's the whole point is that the word doctor is kind of vague. It means different things in different parts of the world, according to my research and according to the history behind the term PhD. Doctor actually belonged to people who had a PhD first, and it just sort of became a general term that was used by medical doctors later on, and not even in most parts of the world. It's mainly in North America, parts of Europe, and parts of Asia, if I'm not mistaken. Is that this term doctor, as it's known by the public, refers to medical doctor, whereas in most other parts of the world, it refers to having a PhD.
Yeah, and I think like people have to understand like the word itself. So like doctor is actually Latin for to teach, right? So really what someone who has their PhD, it really means that they're enlightened. They are someone who is to teach others about whatever that profession is that they have that specialty in. So if you have your PhD in science, that means that you are an enlightened or you're a highly educated person who's able to teach about science. So, I mean, that's the root of that word. And then, of course, they have a doctor of medicine. So that means that person is a doctor of someone who could teach medicine or is teaching about medicine. But I mean, realistically, you got to really look at the history and really have a better understanding. And yes, like you said, you know, more Western civilization really looks at that term doctor as it is only for physicians, and it really isn't. And I think people need to really move away from that. And it's really at the end of the day about education and understanding what does it mean to actually have a PhD versus an MD. They are different things.
Yeah, and not to bring this back to bullying, which we've had 3 episodes on, but I feel like in our profession we should just support each other in whatever way we want to use the term doctor. I mean, if we can't even agree and we're having cat fights about it, I don't know how we're going to elevate ourselves as a profession when all of this petty fighting is going on.
No, I completely agree. It's kind of like I kind of want to do the like can't we all just get along? Like someone worked really hard to get to where they were, and even just across the disciplines, right? So like people who have their PhDs or people who have their MDs or nurse practitioners who have their doctorate. It's just kind of like, you know what? Why are we fighting about terms of people's names? Like, why are you so concerned about whether this nurse practitioner calls herself a doctor because she has her doctorate in this or whatever the case may be? Like, I don't think it should be as threatening as people make it out to be. And it's just kind of like we all have a skill set, a specific skill set, and a specialty in a particular area. And we have to be able to use those various different specialties to work together, which is to work towards the betterment of the patients that we're looking after. It's not about, but I know there is a lot to do with prestige and with not being humble with that term. why do you, I guess it's to ask your question to, I think PhDs and MDs get into the field, get into their fields for various different reasons.
Right. And I think that, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone that has a PhD, but I'm pretty sure that they're not thinking about money when they go into their PhD program.
I don't think so either.
No, because they're going into it for the love of the research and their passion for whatever it is that they are focusing on. I really don't think
Right.
it's for the money because let's face it, there's a big range of what you could be making with a PhD.
And I don't think it's for the prestige either, right? I mean, I'm sure doing your PhD is nothing, and I can't speak from experience because I've only done my master's, but I from anybody that I've spoken to who has done their PhD, it's grueling. It's just like your life is virtually put on hold for 6 to 8 years while you essentially put everything that you ever have, your heart and soul, into this way of learning about and understanding research and actually putting out new research to because there's that whole like you either publish or you perish, right? Where I think physicians, and let's be honest here, like a lot of it is about, yes, money and prestige and status, and then yes, there are a lot of people who do go into it for that aspect of care, but let's not kid ourselves. Like there is that aspect of
Yeah.
it's a title, right?
Yeah, and I have to say, before we recorded this episode, I did put out a post on my social media, just tagging the people that I know of that have PhDs and asking them the question, how do you prefer to be addressed? Do you want doctor at the beginning, or do you want your name, then PhD? And people all said that it really depends on the context of the situation. So, if it's part of a research paper, they might have doctor in the beginning and PhD at the end, or if it's a social situation, they might just have PhD at the end. It really depends. But all of them did say that they absolutely did not want to be mistaken for a medical doctor because I have friends that have their PhD in nursing. I have a friend that has a PhD in neuroscience. Her husband actually has an MD and a PhD, which makes it kind of interesting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it really comes down to a teachable moment. So if you are a PhD and you refer to yourself as a doctor and someone assumes that you're a medical doctor, it's an opportunity to educate people on there being different types of doctors. But
Right.
we all have our own specialties, we all have our own expertise, and it's just a matter of explaining that to the person in the situation.
Yeah, and I really don't think that most people who have their PhDs, and let's we can only really speak namely about nurses. I don't think they want to be recognized as a physician. Like I don't know, maybe that's just me being jaded or not really thinking that way. Like, because even if I was have my PhD, I don't think I'd be like, oh, I want to covertly I want people to think that I'm a doctor. No, I don't. Like, I mean, I think that I worked for that title and I would have no problem explaining to someone to say, hey, yeah, so my name is Amy, or because I'd probably actually be much more informal than some other people. But if I was like, yeah, my name is Dr. So and so, and I'm a nurse who works in this whatever, like I think that's probably the right way to go about it. Like, and then if someone was to ask, just kind of explain to them, like I just don't understand the the animosity and the confusion that came out of all the tweets that I saw. And then to be honest, on the other hand, I saw even physicians kind of being like, oh, really snotty about nurses having their DNP or their PhD. And I think that's a whole other conversation. It's just like, why do you need to be feel or act so threatened for someone else to be called doctor? Like it's not, you don't own the term, so you need to like have a seat.
Yeah, and the thing is, at the end of the day, we're all healthcare professionals. So we are regulated by a certain body, and we have taken a certain amount of education and written certain exams in order to be whatever we are, whether that be a nurse or a doctor or anything in the healthcare profession. So again, let's just support each other and not get hung up on the small little details. Unless someone is trying to pass themselves off as something they're not, I really don't think this. needs to be as big a deal as it is.
No, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think people just have to give merit where merit's due. So like we're all trying to work in a system where there's so many different pressures. Like we hear about all the time. People don't there aren't enough physicians, there aren't enough nurses, there aren't enough healthcare professionals. So why don't we work collaboratively together to really make sure that people are getting the best care that they can? Like whether it's being delivered by a physician or a nurse practitioner, we should be able to work together to achieve the same goal. Like I don't understand why either or of the professions should be threatened by one another. Nurses can't do what physicians are doing, and physicians can't do what nurses are doing. So let's accept the fact that we have different scopes of practice, and we have to work collaboratively together to actually do something that's worthwhile instead of knocking each other down and being like, oh, these people are trying to take our jobs, or these people don't know what they're doing. If they don't know what they're doing, why don't you teach them? Or if you don't think that they have the right perspective, why don't you ask a question? I don't understand why it has to be as difficult as it is.
Yeah, and this just sort of brought me back to a conversation I had recently with someone that has their PhD, is that sometimes they feel undervalued because these days in healthcare, everything is about evidence-based practice, evidence-based research. Well, who do you think does all of this research to make things evidence-based? It's people that have PhDs that are running research studies day in and day out.
Right.
So it takes a long time to produce good research, and it takes just as long, if not longer, to implement the research. So I think we're all kind of dependent on each other to make sure that we can deliver the best possible care to patients that need it.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think if we can really just kind of work together a little bit more collaboratively, like it's almost like a simple situation where it's just like, okay, so let's just be kind to one another. And I think people just need to ask more questions of one another. Like ask people like why are you doing this, or I don't understand this. I think people
Yeah.
just need to ask more questions and just be kind. I really don't know why it had to turn out to be this big situation. It was kind of, to be honest, not the hill that I would be choosing to die on.
Yeah, and we don't really have too many personal stories related to this topic, but I just want to say, at least for me, I have so much respect for medical doctors. I have so much respect for those with PhDs because it's not something that I have. I mean, I just have so much respect for doctors in general, so I just feel like we should work together. I think we keep saying that over and over, but it just makes so much sense if we could just work together.
Yeah, why can't we just all get along?
I know.
Oh dear.
Well,
Well,
do
Sarah, do
you
you have anything else to add, or?
I don't. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think I didn't imagine that this would have been a very long podcast. I think we just need to kind of this one is just it's just really quick and simple. Like let's get along, ask people questions, educate people about your background and how you got to where you are, and don't be an asshole. It's true. Just stop being a jerk and an asshole, and let's all play nice in the sandbox.
Agreed. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy listening and you want to support us, you can definitely follow us on Twitter. Our handle is Gritty Nurse. You can also check us out on Instagram. Our handle there is Gritty Nurse Podcast, hashtag Gritty Nurse, hashtag The Gritty Nurse. So through those two channels, you can send us a question, suggestion for a podcast. Please also like, share, and subscribe.